My dad lifted that $2,000 MacBook with both hands high above his head, then slammed it down on the floor with all his strength. A loud crash echoed through the room as the MacBook hit the ground and shattered. The screen cracked completely, the keyboard flew off, and fragments scattered all across the floor. The MacBook I'd bought as a birthday gift for my daughter had been destroyed by my dad just like that. After that brutal act, my dad shouted, "This is punishment for being selfish. Why did he act like that? What happened? Let's follow this story together." This is a story that proves the saying, blind favoritism leads to wrong actions. Before we get into the details of the story, thanks for choosing our story today. I wish you peace and happiness in this life. Could you give me a like if you want to wish me the same? Now, we should start the story. Hello everyone. I'm Daniel, 45 years old. The story I'm telling today happened on Mia's 14th birthday, exactly 2 years ago. It was my daughter's happiest day, but it was also her saddest, because that was when I realized the true faces of the people in my family. I'm a single dad. My wife passed away in May 2022 after an accident on the highway. She left so suddenly, leaving Mia and me with a void that nothing could ever fill. Since then, I've given all my love to Mia because I know that missing a mother's affection is the most significant disadvantage for a child. I try to be both father and mother, and also a friend, so that she can share everything in life with me. That's why it's Mia's birthday. That day was Mia's 14th birthday. Around 6 p.m., 12 guests had arrived at my house for the party. We invited my parents and my brother Alex's family, including his wife, Emily, and their son, Mason. There were also 2 close neighbors and a few of Mia's school friends. The party initially went on in a cheerful and warm atmosphere. Everyone sang happy birthday together. Mia happily blew out the candles, her face glowing in the flickering candlelight. I stood behind, quietly watching my daughter with a heart full of love. Seeing that warm atmosphere, I thought the party would go beautifully until the very end. But I was wrong. Just a few more minutes, and my daughter would experience a birthday that I'm sure she'll never forget for the rest of her life. Around 7 p.m., the part of the birthday party Mia looked forward to most that year was opening presents. She sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by colorfully wrapped gifts, neatly arranged. Each gift was opened one by one. Mia was happy with every gift she received, from books to cute little makeup sets to small tech gadgets. She carefully thanked each person, her smile never leaving her face. After opening all the gifts from the guests, Mia turned to me, eyes full of curiosity and anticipation, and asked, "Dad, aren't you giving me a gift?" Hearing my daughter ask, I smiled mysteriously and replied, "Of course, there's a gift for Dad's beloved daughter. Just wait a moment." After what I said, Mia smiled brightly, her eyes full of excitement, and I stepped into my office and brought out the gift box I'd prepared beforehand for my daughter. When you hear this, you'll think I'm making too big a deal out of not bringing out my daughter's gift earlier. If you believe that, then you're right. I deliberately made myself the last person to give Mia a gift. Since Mia is very passionate about technology, I had prepared a surprise gift for her birthday that year. It was a brand new MacBook. I hoped that with this MacBook, she'd have a better tool to pursue her passion for programming. I had carefully wrapped the MacBook in a gift box with multiple layers of paper and ribbons. I wanted to create the biggest surprise possible for my daughter. When I brought the gift box to the living room, whispers started echoing everywhere. The people present began whispering to each other. One neighbor said quietly to the person next to them, "Must be an expensive gift since Daniel kept it hidden and wrapped it so formally like that." The other person nodded in agreement and replied, "I think this gift might not be worth much, but it's definitely very meaningful to Mia." Hearing their whispers, I didn't respond. I walked past everyone, approached my daughter, and gave her the gift with all my love. Mia took the gift, her eyes wide with surprise. She almost screamed with excitement. "Oh my God! What's inside, Dad? The gift box is so big." Hearing my daughter speak, I patted her head and replied, "Open it and see. I hope you'll like it." After what I said, Mia began opening each layer of the gift box. First was the wrapping paper on the outside. She carefully opened it a little at a time, afraid of damaging the gift inside. This carefulness reminded me of Mia's mother. She had the same personality as my wife, always meticulous and thoughtful in the most minor things. Looking at her in that moment, I had imagined the scene where Mia would take the gift, her eyes bright, then rush over to hug me and whisper thanks. I imagined she'd be so happy she couldn't speak, would hold the MacBook tight like a treasure. But that was just my imagination. Everything that happened after was completely the opposite. When she had just opened part of the gift box, an unexpected incident happened that left everyone stunned. Mason, Alex's son, suddenly stepped forward from behind and grabbed the gift box from Mia's hands. He said excitedly, "Let me open it." Before Mia, and the others could react, Mason quickly tore through the wrapping paper. His rough hands continued ripping apart the inner paper layer. 10 seconds. In less than 10 seconds, Mason had finished opening the gift box. Looking at his skilled actions, I was certain he'd been tearing open gifts very professionally for years. After seeing the expensive MacBook inside, Mason grabbed the laptop, held it up high, and shouted victoriously, "The MacBook is mine now." After saying that, he took the MacBook and walked straight to where his parents were standing, as if it were a prize he'd just won. What shocked me most at that moment wasn't Mason's actions, but my own family's reaction. My parents burst out laughing. Their laughter rang out full of delight at what had just happened, as if this were some fun joke. My dad even stepped over to pat Mason's head and said proudly, "My grandson is so good at opening gifts." My mom immediately chimed in, saying to Mason in a spoiling voice, "Mason is so clever. This reward rightfully belongs to you." Alex and his wife hugged Mason, their faces full of pride as if their son had just achieved something praiseworthy. At this point, I turned to look at Mia. My heart felt crushed when I saw my daughter crying. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. Her birthday, her gift, her joy, everything had been brazenly stolen right in front of everyone. Right after that, unable to contain the rage boiling inside me, I walked straight to where they were standing and shouted, "Mason, give the MacBook back to Mia, right now." Mason backed away, standing behind Alex and Emily. He replied defiantly, "No, the MacBook is mine. My parents said if I open the gift before Mia, I get this gift." Mason's statement helped me realize a painful truth. He'd been spoiled so much that he could no longer tell right from wrong. At the same time, I also realized this was a plan Alex and Emily had set up beforehand. They had planned this for Mason to steal my daughter's happiest day. That calculation and cruelty were beyond belief. I could no longer stay calm. I stepped forward, reached out and grabbed the MacBook from Mason's hands, and said loudly in a steely voice, "This is a gift I bought for my daughter. If you want a gift, go ask your mom and dad." At this point, Mason put both hands up, trying to hold onto the MacBook, his face red with anger. Alex immediately stepped forward, pulled my hands away, and said irritably, "You can't fight with a child like this." I replied immediately, "But that's a MacBook I bought for my daughter. Do you understand that?" At this point, Emily jumped in. She said, "Come on, it's just a MacBook. Buy Mia something else. Give this one to Mason, okay?" Emily's words were like pouring fuel on the anger rising in me. I gritted my teeth and asked back, "Are you crazy, Emily? Have you ever given my daughter a gift worth over $100? Emily now angrily replied in a sharp voice, "Why do you always bring up money?" I looked straight at her face and said, "The problem isn't money. The problem is that you're always stingy with my daughter. There's no reason I should be generous with your son." Emily opened her mouth to say something, but she stopped, unable to find a response. Alex and Emily's faces were full of anger but helplessness. The neighbors were now also becoming uncomfortable with Alex's family's actions. They began speaking up in our defense. Mr. Johnson, the elderly neighbor, said sternly, "I've never seen anything like this. This is Mia's birthday. You people can't steal the child's gift like that." Mrs. Miller also nodded in agreement and added, "That's right. What kind of parenting is this? Letting him snatch other people's gifts and then being proud of it?" Mia's friends had now come to my daughter's side to comfort her. At that point, I thought everything would end soon. With pressure from the guests, Alex's family would certainly have to return the MacBook to my daughter. But I was wrong, completely wrong, because my dad and mom's subsequent actions would show me their true faces, faces I'd deliberately refused to see for so many years. Seeing the situation growing tense and potentially out of control, my parents also decided to join the conversation. My dad was the first to speak up. He stepped forward, stood facing me, and said, "Daniel, can you give that MacBook to Mason? I'll pay you back." Dad's words made me burst out laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the bitter laugh of someone who just realized a harsh truth. I laughed at his excessive favoritism. That day was my daughter's birthday, and he was demanding to buy back the gift I'd given my daughter to give to his spoiled grandson. Seeing me laugh, Alex asked irritably, "You having fun? What are you laughing at?" Without any hesitation, I replied immediately, "I'm laughing at our dad's favoritism. He has 2 grandchildren, but in his eyes, there's only Mason." Right away, my mom jumped in. She shouted in a harsh voice, "Daniel, he's your father. You need to respect him." As soon as Mom finished speaking, I replied immediately in a calm voice, "Fine. If Dad wants to buy it, the price for this MacBook is $4,000. As soon as I finished speaking, Alex immediately cut in and asked, "Are you joking? A MacBook worth $4,000? Is it studded with diamonds or something?" As soon as Alex finished, I turned to look at him and replied, "It's not studded with diamonds. $4,000 is the price for 2 MacBooks. If Dad wants to buy back this MacBook to give to your son, then he should also give my daughter one. That would be fair. My daughter is also his granddaughter. Or has he forgotten that?" Alex was completely silent after what I said. He couldn't find any words to argue back. After Alex shut up, I turned to Dad and said sarcastically, "I'm right, aren't I, my dear father? If you want to repurchase this MacBook, give me $4,000. One for Mason, one for Mia. Fair, right?" My dad was furious now. Both his hands clenched into fists. He gritted his teeth and asked me, "Are you blackmailing me? For $1,000? What nonsense?" I replied immediately, my voice not shaking at all. "You and Mom have been favoring Mason way too much for too long. I'm just protecting my daughter's rights. Something you and Mom should have been doing as grandparents." Hearing what I said, my mom jumped in again. She said to me in that familiar lecturing tone, "Daniel, families need to know how to sacrifice for each other. You're almost 43 years old. Why don't you understand that yet?" As soon as Mom finished, I turned to look straight into her eyes and asked, "Families need to sacrifice for each other? Then let me ask you, Mom, when my wife died, did you love Mia more? When Mason got $2,000 for tuition last year, did Mia get a single cent? When Mason got taken to Hawaii for summer vacation by you and Dad, Mia stayed home alone. For Mason's birthday, you gave $3,000 for the party, while Mia's birthday gifts were just cheap gifts hastily bought from the dollar store. The way you're talking about it means my daughter and I have to be the ones sacrificing while you, Dad, and Alex's family only know how to take. Is that right?" My mom was stunned after my question. She wanted to say something, but stayed silent. The silence lasted several seconds. The room seemed frozen in tense air. Then suddenly, my dad shouted, breaking the silence, "Enough!" After saying that, he walked toward Mason with heavy, angry steps. He grabbed the MacBook from Mason's hands. The entire room held its breath, not knowing what he was going to do. I thought he would give it back to Mia, but no. He lifted the MacBook with both hands high above his head, then slammed it down on the floor with all his strength. A loud crash echoed through the room as the MacBook hit the ground and shattered. The screen cracked completely, the keyboard flew off, and fragments scattered all across the floor. Over $2,000 turned to dust in an instant. Seeing my dad smash the MacBook, Mia screamed in pain and then burst into sobs. My daughter collapsed, her shoulders shaking in waves. After that brutal act, my dad shouted, "This is punishment for being selfish." That statement of his left all my and Mia's guests stunned. After witnessing Dad's actions, I could no longer control my emotions. I rushed forward, grabbed my dad's collar tightly, and shouted in his face, "What the hell are you doing? Are you insane?" The entire room went dead silent when they saw the fist I'd raised. In that moment, I only knew one thing: to protect my daughter. I was ready to give him a beating. Even if he were my father, I didn't care. When Mia saw me about to hit my dad, she quickly ran over and hugged my arm tightly. Her voice choked as she pleaded, "Dad, please stop. Please don't hit him." Surprised by her unexpected intervention, I shouted at her, "Let go. Let me give him a beating. He smashed your MacBook." Mia turned pale with fear, but she didn't let go. Instead, she hugged my arm even tighter. She said to me shakily, Dad, I don't want the police to arrest you. Please stop. Let's call the police instead of you hitting him. Please. Mia's words at that moment were like a bucket of cold water poured directly on the rage burning inside me. I realized I had almost made the biggest mistake of my life. At this point, the two neighbors also spoke up, supporting Mia's suggestion to call the police. Mr. Johnson stepped closer and said, "Daniel, calm down. Listen to Mia. Calling the police is the right way to handle this." After saying that, Mr. Johnson immediately dialed 911, without waiting for my agreement. Mia had now pulled my arm away from my dad's collar. My dad straightened his collar. Then he said through gritted teeth, "You dare to hit your father. Remember this day." After saying that, he signaled to my mom and Alex's family to leave, as if they were the victims in this situation. At this point, I stepped forward to block him and said, "Stop. The police will be here in a few minutes. You're not allowed to leave. You destroyed my property. You have to take responsibility." All five of them looked at me with eyes full of anger and hatred. A few seconds later, Mr. Johnson spoke up, his voice gentle but practical. "Let them go, Daniel. We'll testify for you when the police arrive." Hearing my neighbor's sincere advice, I thought for a few seconds, then stepped aside so they could leave. They walked out the door one by one. Not a single apology. Not a single look of remorse. Mason even turned back to look at me with a defiant expression. Just as they had left the house and were starting the car, I suddenly remembered something significant, something I had almost forgotten in my anger. Immediately, as fast as possible, I rushed out to the porch like an arrow. Getting there, I shouted, "Wait!" My dad was about to step on the gas to leave when, heard me shout, stopped, and rolled down the car window. I walked quickly toward the driver's side window. My dad now looked at me and asked triumphantly, "What's wrong? You realized you were wrong, didn't you?" I replied immediately in a calm voice. "Right, I realized I was wrong." After my answer, my dad broke into a satisfied smile. It was the smile of a winner, the satisfied smile of someone who thought he'd taught his wayward child a lesson. His voice was cheerful as he said to me, "I knew it. Admitting you're wrong is good. That's what makes you my son. Go inside. I'll talk to you tomorrow." While he was still wearing that victorious smile, I suddenly reached my hand through the car window, turned off the engine, and then pulled out the entire set of car keys. My unexpected action startled my dad. The smile on his face froze. My mom, sitting in the passenger seat, hurriedly asked in a panicked voice, "Daniel, what are you doing?" Ignoring Mom's question, I didn't bother to answer. I looked straight into Dad's eyes, smiled, and said, "I was wrong for letting you borrow this car for the past 3 years. From now on, I'm taking it back. This is my car. I have the right to take it back whenever I want." My answer left my parents so shocked that they couldn't speak. After realizing he'd been played, my dad exploded in anger, shouting like a cornered animal, "You dare to mess with me? You?" Before he could finish his sentence, applause rang out from behind me. The guests, seeing me run quickly to the porch, had also curiously followed and witnessed everything. Mr. Johnson said loudly with a delighted voice, "Well done, Daniel. Make those 2 old folks walk home. Serves them right." My parents were furious at that point. My dad jumped out of the car, then opened the trunk and took out a hammer he always kept there. Seeing the hammer in his hands, I wasn't afraid at all. On the contrary, I laughed and said calmly, "Oh dear Dad, what are you planning to do with that hammer? If you hit me with the hammer, you'll go to jail. And if you smash my car, do you and Mom have enough money to pay for it?" My dad gripped the hammer tightly in his hand and shouted, "Will you stop that sarcastic way of talking right now? I'm your father." As soon as he finished, I coldly replied, "Wrong person. I don't have a father. My father died the exact moment you smashed my daughter's MacBook." After saying that, I turned around, took the car keys with me, and walked straight into the house. I left them standing there with their anger, with the car that had no keys, with their humiliation in front of my neighbors. To them, they might think the relationship between them and me ended that night. But to me, that was just the beginning, because my following actions would make them pay the price they deserved for what they did to my daughter. After they left, I went back inside. The living room was now suffocatingly quiet, with only the MacBook's fragments scattered on the floor as evidence of the storm that had just passed. About 15 minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers came in, 1 male and 1 female. They observed the scene, noted the fragments on the floor, and then began taking statements from the people present and me. I presented the whole sequence of events, from when Mason grabbed the gift to when my dad smashed the MacBook. After that, I opened my laptop, accessed the camera system, and played the entire sequence for them. The video clearly captured every moment. The 2 officers silently watched the entire video. The female officer shook her head, while the male officer continuously wrote in his notebook. Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Miller, the 2 kind neighbors, also provided sworn testimony. They recounted everything in detail and objectively. Their statements completely matched what the video had recorded. An hour later, after completing the initial procedures and collecting all the evidence, the police left. They had everything they needed to proceed with the case. Everyone at the party helped me clean up the MacBook fragments. Each piece of plastic, each shard of broken glass was picked up and thrown in the trash bag. Looking at those fragments, I didn't feel sorry about the money. I just felt heartbroken that my daughter's expectations and joy had been shattered along with the machine. After cleaning up, everyone left one by one. The neighbors squeezed my hand tightly, encouraging me after Mia's birthday party had been destroyed by the very people who called themselves family. Around 10 p.m. that day, after all the guests had left, I went to Mia's room and knocked on the door. Mia opened the door after 2 minutes, her eyes swollen. Clearly, Mia had cried a lot after everyone left. Seeing her like that, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. But then, the sadness on Mia's face quickly disappeared when she saw what I was holding in my hands. It was a brand new MacBook, pink, Mia's favorite color. Her eyes opened wide, not believing what she was seeing. After everyone left, I immediately contacted a nearby store and asked them to rush deliver a new MacBook. Since it was past 9 p.m., they initially refused to deliver. But after I explained my situation, told them about the ruined birthday party, about the MacBook being smashed in front of my daughter, the store manager changed his mind. He said he also had a daughter and he understood how a father felt. He personally drove over to deliver the new MacBook to me. Looking at the pink MacBook in my hands, Mia said emotionally in a shaky voice, "Dad, you didn't need to buy another MacBook. I'm okay." I patted her head and said, "My daughter deserves to have a MacBook. No one has the right to steal your joy." Mia burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of happiness. Holding her in my arms, I promised myself I would never let anyone bully my daughter again. And that very night, I decided I would make them pay the price for their cruel actions. Midnight, after Mia had fallen asleep, I was still sitting in front of my laptop screen in my office. I sat watching the video from the living room camera again, looking again at the scene of Mia crying, the scene of my dad throwing the MacBook to the floor, the scene of their whole family laughing and joking over my daughter's pain. Each frame was like a knife cutting into my heart. I decided to post that video on social media. Initially, I hesitated a bit because the incident involved Mason, a 14-year-old child. But after thinking it through, I realized that all our relatives and acquaintances needed to know the truth about what had happened. They needed to know the true faces of people who had long been praised as an exemplary family. As for Mason, he needed to learn the lesson that actions have consequences. The video, over 10 minutes long, was then posted to my personal page. I added a short but meaningful status: toxic family. From today on, my family is just Mia and me. After finishing the post, I shut down the computer, turned off my phone, and went to sleep after a long, exhausting day. The next morning, as soon as I opened my phone, I was overwhelmed by a series of notifications. Tons of messages and missed calls appeared on the screen. My post had hundreds of comments from relatives, friends, and even strangers. Someone had shared this post, and it spread at lightning speed. People watched the video a lot, and after watching it, they all left comments. What surprised me was that all the comments were on my and Mia's side. My mom's cousin wrote, "I can't believe this. Is this how they treat their motherless granddaughter? Disgusting." An old friend of my dad's commented, "Thomas, I've known you for 50 years. I never thought you could do something like this to your own granddaughter." A stranger wrote, "A grandfather smashing his granddaughter's birthday gift? He should be sued in court and get life in prison." Some people tagged Alex and Emily, calling them failed parents who raised their child to be a thief. Seeing everyone's support, especially from relatives, I believed my parents and Alex's family would soon face the consequences of their actions. And just as I predicted, around 10 a.m., my phone rang. Alex's name appeared on the screen. As soon as I pressed answer, Alex shouted, "You bastard! How dare you put us on social media? Do you know my wife and I are about to lose our jobs? Colleagues are whispering behind our backs. Relatives have been calling to curse us out from morning till now. It's all your fault." After hearing what Alex said, I replied, "Get lost." After saying that, I hung up and blocked his number immediately. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was my dad's number. He shouted through the phone as soon as I answered, "You're a monster. No one puts their own parents on social media to shame them. God will punish you." As soon as he finished, I replied without hesitation, "No grandfather smashes his granddaughter's MacBook either. If you can dish it out, you'd better be able to take it. God will send you to hell when you die." Dad gritted his teeth and asked back, "What did you just say to me?" I replied sarcastically, "Are you deaf, old man? Go get your ears checked." After saying that, I hung up again and blocked his number too. I also blocked my mom's and Emily's numbers. And those were just the first steps in my plan to make them pay the price. That very afternoon, I contacted a reputable law firm in the city. The lawyer handling my case was named Robert, a middle-aged man with many years of experience in lawsuits. After hearing me present the entire incident and watching the video from the security camera, Mr. Robert nodded and said, "This is a pretty clear-cut case. You have video evidence, witnesses, and a police report. We can definitely win this lawsuit." I asked him about the process and timeline. Mr. Robert explained that with such complete evidence, we could request a quick trial. I nodded and said, "I want to push this as fast as possible. Money isn't an issue. I want them to understand that actions have consequences." Mr. Robert looked at me with understanding eyes and replied, "I understand. This isn't just about the MacBook. This is about justice for your daughter. We have to work on the paperwork immediately." Just 1 month later, the trial took place. The trial proceeded quickly because the evidence was so clear. The video was played on the courtroom screen. Everyone present fell silent, watching as my dad smashed the MacBook. Mia's cries from the video echoed through the courtroom, making many people turn away. My dad's lawyer tried to defend him, saying it was an action done in anger without intent. But Mr. Robert countered sharply. He pointed out that my dad had actively grabbed the MacBook, lifted it high, and slammed it hard to the ground. That was clearly an intentional action, not an accident. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. My dad, who directly smashed the MacBook, had to compensate for the full value of the MacBook plus emotional distress fees for Mia. The total compensation exceeded $25,000. When the judge finished reading the verdict, I turned to look at Mia. My daughter sat there with calm eyes, neither happy nor sad. Perhaps for her, the compensation money wasn't necessary. What mattered was that justice had been served. But the story didn't end there. Following lawyer Robert's suggestion, the court also issued a restraining order. My parents and Alex's family were banned from coming near my house, Mia's school, and any other places my daughter and I regularly went. The order was effective for life, and any violation would result in criminal prosecution. After the trial, as we stepped out of the courtroom, Mia and I walked past where my parents and Alex's family were standing. They looked at me with eyes full of hatred, but no one dared say anything because the restraining order was effective immediately. I held Mia's hand tightly, walked straight toward the exit, not looking back even for a second. This chapter of my life had closed. Those who were once family were now just strangers, and the law had ensured they could never come close to hurting my daughter again. 2 years have passed since that fateful birthday. Today, as I tell this story, Mia is 16 years old. My daughter has grown so much, both physically and mentally. She's still passionate about technology, still dreams of becoming a software engineer. The pink MacBook I gave her that night is still used every day by her to learn programming. Mia and I have had a peaceful life. We take care of each other. We no longer have contact with my parents or Alex's family. When someone deliberately brings them up, I'll ask that person not to mention them or I'll stand up and leave. Some wounds run too deep to heal. Through my story, I want to share with you 3 lessons I've learned. Lesson 1. Never stay silent in the face of injustice. Lesson 2. Family isn't just about blood. People who call themselves family but don't love and respect you don't deserve to be in your life. Sometimes, kind neighbors are more valuable than blood relatives. Lesson 3. Always protect your children. Children are the most precious gift life gives you. Don't let anyone have the right to bully or hurt your child. You're the final wall protecting them, and that wall isn't allowed to fall. My story ends here. Before finishing, I have one question I want to ask you. Should I someday forgive and reconcile with my parents and my brother Alex's family? Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below this story. If the story touched your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share the story. Thank you for listening to my story. We voted. You're paying for my daughter's birthday party. That was what my sister said to me after I asked her why she used my card. Specifically, the authorized card I had opened for my mom, to pay nearly $4,000 for her daughter's birthday party. My parents then took her side and called me selfish, saying I didn't know how to make sacrifices for my family after I made a scene about it. After that, I canceled the authorized card and worked with the bank to get the money back. Follow my story, and let me know if I was wrong for taking the money back. Hello everyone, my name is Roland. I'm 29 years old and currently a senior software engineer at a tech company in Oregon. I've been working here for 7 years now, partly because the compensation is well worth the effort I put in and partly because this was the place that gave me a shot with a part-time job when I was just a freshman in college. With a post-tax income of over $150,000 a year, and since I'm still single, I've bought myself a small house and a decent car to get to work every day. My career is in a good place, but my personal life feels lonely. I only hang out with a few close friends and occasionally grab dinner with some coworkers. At this point, I'm sure some of you are wondering, what about your family? The truth is, I did have a family. I was happy with my parents, older sister, and niece, whom I loved like my child. But I was the one who cut myself off from them. It happened on my niece's 6th birthday. About a year ago, on a weekday, I think, I was working through some tasks at my desk when my phone started buzzing. It was a call from Alice, my older sister. I let it ring until the second tone before I swiped to answer. As soon as she heard my voice, she jumped straight to the point, her tone a little rushed. Roland, Lydia's birthday is this weekend. Make sure you come. I replied, got it. That was it. No extra reminders, no small talk. She hung up right after. A couple of minutes later, a text came in with the time and location of the party. The moment I saw the name of the restaurant, I paused. I knew the place. It was one of the most upscale venues in town, known for hosting all-inclusive kids' parties, with buffet options, a private play area, entertainers, and even gift bags for the little guests if you went for the complete package. With nearly 20 people invited, I figured the cost must have been at least $3,000. Without giving it too much thought, I put my phone down and returned to work. Not even 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my mom. She reminded me to show up for Lydia's birthday and not to forget to bring a gift. After the call ended, I smiled to myself. That's just how my mom is. Always the one to make sure everyone's taken care of, always thoughtful in her way. That weekend, around 5 in the evening, I showed up at the restaurant Alice had texted me about earlier. In my hands was a gift I had wrapped the night before. A toy cooking set with dolls, pots and pans, a toy electric stove, and a little pink apron. I knew it wasn't the most expensive gift out there, but for a kid like Lydia, who loved cooking, I was sure she'd be thrilled. When I entered the private party room, I saw a few people had arrived. Relatives from my mom's side, some cousins, and both of my parents were there. As soon as Lydia spotted me, she ran out from a corner of the room, still holding a piece of cake in her hand, and shouted, "Uncle Ro!" Then she wrapped her arms around me like we hadn't seen each other in forever. I bent down and gently patted her head. I told her, "I've got a present for my little chef right here." I handed her the box. Lydia dropped straight to the floor and excitedly tore through the wrapping paper. When she saw what was inside, she gasped, "Oh my gosh, it even has a mini oven. Uncle, this looks just like the one in the video I watched yesterday." Seeing her smile, I nodded and smiled back. I thought that moment was enough. But not even 30 seconds later, I heard Alice's voice from the dinner table. Calm, even, but loud enough for everyone to hear. You're a senior software engineer, make good money, and get your niece a toy set that costs a few dozen bucks? I looked up at her. She was still holding her drink, eyes fixed on the table, like she was making an observation, nothing more. Then my dad chimed in, voice low and slow. She's right. You're her uncle, Roland. That kind of gift. People might look at it the wrong way. And then my mom added, in her usual gentle, instructive tone, you don't have to spend a fortune, but it wouldn't hurt to put in a little more thought for a child's birthday, Roland. I stood there, my hand still resting on Lydia's shoulder. No one said a word in my defense. Some pretended not to hear. Some just stared down at their plates. I nodded and, with a steady voice, said, all right, I'll be more thoughtful next time. At that moment, I thought about walking out. But it was Lydia's special day, and I didn't want to ruin it. So I stayed quiet and nodded. Still, inside, it felt like I had just been pushed out of the celebration I'd made an effort to be part of. After the greetings, everyone slowly settled into their seats. The party started with a birthday song, with the kids singing along to a video playing on the big screen. Lydia wore a paper crown, blew out the candles on a two-tiered purple cake, and beamed as everyone clapped and cheered. I sat at the far end of the long banquet table between two cousins from my mom's side who I barely kept in touch with anymore. They chatted away about family stuff, their kids' schools, and how mortgage rates were climbing. A while later, Alice stood up and clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. She looked around and spoke loudly. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Lydia's birthday. It only comes once a year, so this time, I wanted to make it a bit more special. Give her a memory to hold on to. Everyone clapped. A few even whistled in support. Then she glanced over at me and, still smiling brightly, added, and a special thanks to Uncle Roland, who's always there for her, even with his packed schedule. I smiled slightly and gave a slight nod in return. I knew that line was just for show. The look in her eyes didn't match the words of gratitude. Then dinner was served, honey-roasted chicken, salad, kid-friendly pizza, spaghetti, soda, and snacks. The party itself felt cozy. People at the table called out to one another, passed dishes around, swapped old stories, and laughed out loud at memories I couldn't even recall being part of. About 30 minutes later, the party moved into the part the kids had been waiting for the most. The music in the room got louder, the lights dimmed a little, and then through the door, a clown in a bright, colorful outfit walked in. The kids squealed with excitement. Lydia jumped out of her seat, laughing, and dragged along two of my cousin's kids. One looked about 5, the other maybe 3. I couldn't remember their names, only that they showed up at every party like it was a given. The clown started making balloon animals, twisting them into swords and poodles, then did a magic trick where he pulled scarves from thin air. The kids erupted in cheers and applause every time he did something new. I sat quietly at the back, watching it all like an audience member at a show I never bought a ticket for. After the performance, a staff member wheeled in a small table full of party favors. Each child got a personalized gift bag filled with candy, stickers, small plastic toys, and a coupon for their next visit. Right then, I looked around the room and took everything in. Nothing was missing. Balloons covered the ceiling, a banner with Lydia's name hung front and center, a photo corner decorated with a MasterChef Junior theme, and even a dedicated photographer going around capturing every moment. At that point, I knew this party wasn't cheap. The private room rental, the theme decorations, the two-tier cake, the clown, and the custom gift bags would easily add up to over $3,000. Maybe closer to $4,000 with the photographer and the private play area included. My family wasn't poor, but nobody was exactly swimming in money either. Not to the point of throwing a party like this without careful planning. So I started guessing. Maybe Alice came into a large sum recently? Maybe Mom pitched in? Or maybe my brother-in-law had been doing well in business lately. At that moment, I had no clue who was footing the bill for the party. Not until 30 minutes later. About 30 minutes later, once the kids started getting tired and the adults had moved on to casual conversations, I saw Alice get up from the table. She picked up her small purse and walked briskly toward the front counter. I was a little surprised. A thought crossed my mind. Maybe I was right. Perhaps she just got a big bonus or Mom gave her some extra money. Either way, I'd honestly feel relieved if she covered the cost of today's party. And truthfully, I'd be happy for her. But not even a minute later, my phone buzzed. I looked down. The screen showed a notification from the bank. You've just made a payment of $3,842.20 at Bounce N Bites Playhouse. I froze for a few seconds. Then I opened my banking app and checked every detail. The card used wasn't my primary one but a secondary one. Specifically, I gave Mom the one almost 3 years ago so she could use it for household bills like electricity, water, and gas. I remembered clearly what I told her the last time we talked about it. Mom, this card's just for household stuff. Okay? Let me know if you don't need it anymore, and I'll cancel it. Since then, I haven't seen any strange activity, only regular bill payments. But now, that card had just been swiped to pay for the entire birthday party, and I had no idea. I looked up toward the front desk. Alice was still there, signing something on a receipt. Next to her was a restaurant staff member smiling and nodding. Right then, a rush of questions hit me all at once, bubbling up like air in water. Should I walk over? Should I ask what the hell just happened? Should I interrupt everything, demand they cancel the charge and make them explain? Or should I stay quiet and wait for someone to bring it up? Or maybe no one planned to say anything at all. Maybe, to them, this was already a done deal. I glanced over at Lydia, still sitting on the floor, happily playing with the toy cooking set I brought. She had no idea. She smiled and held up a plastic pot, turning to the boy beside her and saying, "It's ready. Eat up." And I just stood there, phone in hand, that bank notification still glowing on the screen, feeling like my family had just blindsided me for the first time. Right after that, I stepped out from the corner of the room and walked straight over to Bryce, Alice's husband. He was chatting with 2 of our cousins from Dad's side, still holding a half-finished beer. I stood right in front of him and said, my voice low but clear, "Bryce, could you take Lydia and those 2 kids outside? Walk them around, maybe to the play area. I need to handle something here, and I don't want the kids watching grown-ups argue." He froze for a second, furrowed his brows like he didn't understand, then glanced toward Alice, who was still at the counter, almost like he was waiting for some cue. But I didn't look away, and the serious expression on my face must have said enough, because after a moment, he gave a quick nod. A few minutes later, the kids were led out of the room. I turned back and faced my parents. Just seconds later, Alice returned to the table, her wallet still in hand. I looked directly at her and said, keeping my tone steady, "You used my card to pay. Why did you do that without asking me first?" She set her wallet down, crossed her arms, and replied, "Because we took a vote. You were chosen to cover the birthday party for my daughter." I stared at her. A vote? Who voted? When? This time, my mom chimed in, her tone as sweet and casual as if she were talking about the weather. "Well, you're single. You make good money. And honestly, no one else in the family could afford a party like this. Your sister wanted to give Lydia something special to remember. We all thought it made sense for you to take care of it." I swallowed hard and asked her, "It's her daughter's party, not mine. If you wanted me to help, you should have asked. Instead, you used my card without saying a word." At that moment, my dad set his drink down and said in a dry, flat voice, "You can afford it. Why are you making such a big deal? A few $1,000s isn't much with what you earn." I turned back to Alice, trying to keep it together. "Do you not see anything wrong with this?" She answered right away, "No, you don't have kids. You don't pay for tuition, insurance, or daily expenses like we do. You live alone and earn a lot. Why shouldn't you contribute something to the family? It's just once a year." At that point, I had nothing left to say. I walked out the door, leaving behind everyone at that birthday party, with all of them watching me go. I remember when I was a kid, when the family needed to spend money on something, my parents always asked my sister first, "Have you bought your textbooks yet? Which prom dress are you considering? And how many friends are you inviting to your birthday this year?" And I would usually stand nearby, listening. That's how I learned. My turn would always come after. Most of my school clothes back then were end-of-season sale items Mom picked up. They weren't bad, but they were always the just enough kind of choice. My backpack was basic. My sneakers were never the newest model. I never had birthday parties. Just a small meal on the day Dad happened to have off. Maybe a few slices of pizza and a chocolate cake from Walmart. No balloons, no friends over, no birthday candles. Strangely enough, I was always okay with it. I never asked for more. Not because I didn't want more, but because I knew if I asked, Mom would worry, and Dad would go quiet and change the subject. That's why I learned early on to stay silent. I didn't ask for things. I didn't want to add more pressure to a house that already felt stretched thin. Back then, I thought it was a small sacrifice to keep the peace. But after my niece's birthday party that day, I realized something. Maybe from the beginning, I had been taught to live with the idea that there was never really a part meant just for me. When I reached adulthood and went off to college, I was lucky enough to get into software engineering, the field I had loved since I was a kid. Back then, my family wasn't in a good financial place, so I chose to take out student loans to afford school. I didn't overthink it. As long as I got to study, I believed I'd figure out the rest. From my first year, I started working part-time. During the day, I was a teaching assistant for an intro class. At night, I worked the counter at a bakery near the dorms. When I had time on weekends, I'd install Windows or fix laptops for other students to earn more. I can't remember how many cups of watered-down coffee I drank, how many late-night fast food meals I scarfed down at 11 p.m., or how many times I passed out on a lab desk. But I remember one thing: I never once asked my family for extra money. There was only one exception. Sophomore year, my laptop died right before midterms. I texted my mom, saying, "My computer won't power on. I think I'll have to get it fixed." That night, she transferred me $300, along with a short message: "Keep going. We don't have much, but your dad and I believe in you." I read that message in silence. I didn't reply right away. I knew that sending me that money wasn't easy for her, and I also knew that I had no excuse to complain after that moment. No matter how tired I got, I had to keep going. And then I remembered 3 years ago. At the time, my mom had just retired. My dad was still working part-time at a bookstore near home. The pay wasn't much, but he said it kept him from getting bored. One evening, my mom called me. Her voice was tired, but she kept it gentle, like always. "The electricity bill this month is high. I don't even know why." After she said that, I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to break it down or offer advice. I opened my laptop, logged into my account, and set up a supplementary credit card for her. Along with the card, I included a small handwritten note that said, "This card is just for household bills. Okay? Electricity, water, gas. If you ever stop needing it, let me know, and I'll cancel it." And for the next 2 years, everything seemed fine. There were no unusual charges. Until that night at the birthday party, when I looked down and saw the message saying over $3,000 had just been charged. As I sat there staring into the dark, still room, the sound of my phone's bedtime alarm snapped me back to reality. I reached over to turn it off, then immediately opened my banking app. The $3,842.20 transaction remained, sitting boldly among charges I never authorized. I went to the card management section and scrolled down. There it was, the supplementary card under my mom's name. The same one I'd issued 3 years ago with just one simple instruction: only use it for household bills. Without hesitation, I tapped Lock Card. A confirmation screen popped up, asking if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. 3 seconds later, the status changed to deactivated. And with that, I knew exactly what I needed to do in the morning. Not to ask for the money back, but to let them know I wasn't brushing it off this time. Not because of the amount, but because of how they had treated my silence for all these years. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of an alarm, but because I hadn't been able to sleep properly all night. I made myself a cup of black coffee, then opened the family group chat, the one that, for years, only lit up when someone needed something from me. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I typed the message slowly, sentence by sentence, and this is what I wrote. The $3,842.20 transaction at Bounce and Bites Playhouse was made using the supplementary card I issued to Mom, which I had clearly stated was to be used only for household bills. Giving that card to someone else and using it without my consent is completely unacceptable. I was not asked. I was not informed. That is not what family understanding means. I am requesting that the full amount be repaid within 3 days, transferred to my account. This is not a suggestion. This is a clear demand. I'm also informing you that the card was deactivated last night. Any further transactions will be declined. Once I finished writing, I read it over one more time, then hit send. And that was the first time I set a boundary in writing. Right there in the very group that, for years, had only ever flowed in one direction. Less than 10 minutes after I sent the message, replies started flooding in. One after another, faster than I could read the last before the next popped up. Alice was the first to respond. Her tone, as always, was sharp and ready to strike. "What's that supposed to mean, Roland? Talking about money like this first thing in the morning? You're blowing this up over one birthday party for your niece? What kind of family nitpicks every single dollar like that?" Then came my mom's messages. "I'm sorry if you feel upset, but I thought it was no big deal. You're in a better place financially. I figured you wouldn't mind. You gave me the card, and I just wanted to help Alice make the day a little more special for the little one. I read all of it but didn't reply. What struck me most was their first instinct wasn't to take responsibility, even when being called out for misusing money. It was to defend themselves, to turn it back on me. Then came a message from my dad. You're an adult now, but how you handle this isn't right. When a family needs something, we share. If you're treating this like a legal matter. At that moment, what surprised me wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. Not a single person mentioned paying the money back. No one asked why I was hurt. Not one word acknowledged they had crossed a line I'd set years ago. Every message carried the same underlying message. How dare you react this way? Note, how did this happen in the first place? And right then, I knew I had been right to send that message. And after reading all their responses, I was even more certain. If I didn't act now, if I didn't set a boundary, this would happen again. Maybe it would be another party. Maybe some urgent situation. But if I stayed silent again, that silence would be considered permission. After that, I set my phone aside and continued my morning like any other day. I opened my laptop and started reading work emails. By late morning, a few more messages came in. Not from Mom or Alice, but from people on the sidelines. My aunt, my mom's sister, and a cousin who once messaged me in a panic to borrow $1,200 last year and then disappeared without a word. Their messages read, Roland, you should talk to your mom and sister gently. It's not a big deal. Don't let this blow up. Money comes and goes, but don't let family love slip away. I read each line without feeling a thing. The words were different, but the message was always the same. Family matters, boundaries don't. Not one asked me how many late shifts or sleepless nights went into that nearly $4,000. No one wondered how often I'd said no to buying something I wanted just because I didn't think I deserved it or it wasn't necessary. No one asked how I felt, sitting quietly at a party I unknowingly paid for, while not everyone treated me like the one who made it happen. And no one asked how hard I had worked for years, to avoid being a burden, to never ask for help, to make sure I didn't add even a sliver of stress to anyone else's life. I didn't respond to a single message that day. After staying silent the entire day, I thought they'd get the message that I didn't want to be dragged into it any further. But no, it didn't end there. Just as I shut down my computer and got ready for bed that evening, my phone lit up again. This time it was a FaceTime call from my mom. 5 minutes later, I got a call from Alice, then my dad. All three of them were less than 10 minutes apart. I didn't answer a single one. Then my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mom. I played it. Her voice was hoarse from crying. She said, Roland, please don't make this worse. I know you're angry, but I never thought it would come to this. I didn't mean any harm. A few minutes later, Alice sent one final message. No sugarcoating. She said, if you're going to sue, then do it. But don't expect this family to speak to you again. I stared at that message for a while. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel sad. I just felt relieved. At that exact moment, I finally understood something. This so-called family I'd been trying so hard to protect all this time only existed as long as I stayed quiet, nodded along, and kept paying. The moment I stopped doing that, everything, the care, the kindness, the so-called bond vanished without a trace. The next morning, I called the bank to report a dispute on a $3,842.20 transaction made using the secondary card. I explained clearly that the card had been issued for my mom and was solely for basic household expenses. No agreement allowed her to hand the card over to anyone else. The bank representative asked me a few questions. I answered briefly, calmly, but firmly. The call didn't last more than 10 minutes. Before we ended, they said, we'll start the investigation today. You'll be eligible for a reversal if the transaction is confirmed as unauthorized. I thanked them and hung up. By noon, I got a text from my mom. It wasn't angry. I was disappointed. She wrote, I never thought you'd choose this way. No matter what happens, we're still family. Why did you have to push it this far? I stared at the message for a while, then set the phone on the table. I didn't reply. About 3 days after I filed the complaint, the bank sent an email confirming that an investigation was underway. The transaction would be put on hold, and I'd get a refund if it were verified as unauthorized. While folding clothes and getting ready for a work trip early next week, my phone rang again that evening. This time, it was my dad. I was about to decline the call like I had before, but for some reason, my hand paused, and then I answered. His voice came through, full of anger. He asked me, Do you want to take this that far? I didn't respond right away. He pressed on. I don't get it. Why are you being so hard about this? It was just a birthday party. The girl had fun. And now you're turning it into lawsuits and drama. Is it worth it? Then I answered slowly, Dad, this isn't about a birthday party. It's about respect. I made it clear what that card was for. But no one asked me a single thing before using it. And now, instead of apologizing, everyone's turning it back on me. There was silence on the other end. Then he exhaled like he didn't want to argue anymore. Fine, do what you want. But if you go all the way with this, don't expect ever to return. I didn't say anything after that. By then, I already understood, in this family, being allowed back in always came with one condition. I had to stay quiet, take it, and play the role of the one who understands. The call ended without either of us saying goodbye. After the call with my dad, I turned off my phone for the next day. I didn't check any messages or open the family group chat. I needed silence, my silence, to cut myself off from all the noise coming from the people who used to call themselves my family. That evening, when I finally powered the phone back on, the screen lit up with 3 new messages. Not from my dad. Not from my mom. Not from Alice either. They were from someone I never expected to speak up. My cousin. The one who had always stayed quiet, even when she saw me being taken advantage of. She wrote, You did the right thing, but you'll probably never be recognized for it. I've heard what they say about you these past few days. Cold. Ungrateful. None of them willing to admit they were wrong. I don't dare to speak up, but I understand. In that message, my eyes locked on the last line. I understand. And in that moment, I felt a lump in my throat. Not because I was moved, but because I realized I had lived too long inside a circle where even being understood was rare. That day ended without a single apology. No one in the family reached out to ask if I was okay or if I needed anything. Only silence remained, but this time it was a silence I created. And I would keep it as the last way I had left to protect whatever was still mine. A week later, the bank sent an email confirming that the transaction had been marked as unauthorized. The amount would be refunded to my account within 3 business days. When I saw the $3,842.20 show up again, it didn't feel like a win. It felt more like picking up a shirt that had once been ripped out of my hands. Worn, wrinkled, and stripped of whatever meaning it used to have. In the days that followed, no one called to apologize. No one said, We crossed a line. The family group chat was still there, but no one had said anything since I sent the message asking for the money back. I didn't delete the group. I just muted it. Not because I was holding on to hope, but because I wanted the right to choose when I saw them instead of waiting for someone else to decide that for me. Since that day, my life shifted into a different rhythm. Quieter, tidier, and clearer than it had been at any other point in my life. I still worked at the same company. On weekends, I went hiking. Some afternoons, I did nothing. Just made a cup of coffee, played an old playlist, and sat on the balcony watching the sun slowly sink behind the buildings. I learned to cook. I learned how to buy things I liked without wondering if someone else needed my help more. I even started meeting new people. Nothing serious, nothing rushed, but enough to remind myself that I could still open up. And then, about a month ago, it was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I looked at the screen, and it took me a few seconds to process what I saw. Standing outside my door were my parents, and Alice. Right after that, I stepped out and opened the door just a crack, leaving about half a meter between us. No one said anything at first. All 3 of them just stood there. My mom looked down at her feet, clutching her purse like she was holding onto something uncertain. About 30 seconds later, my dad spoke first. His voice was lower and softer than I remembered. I want to talk for a bit if you'll let me. I nodded, but I didn't invite them in. Then my mom looked up. Her words came out uneven. Some parts caught in her throat. She said, I know we were wrong. That whole thing, it shouldn't have happened. I didn't realize you were that hurt. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting them speak. Then Alice looked straight at me, for the first time in months. Her voice had lost the edge it used to carry, though it wasn't exactly soft either. Maybe I'm just tired. You're not the bad one here. What happened that day? Yeah, it went too far. I was wrong. Mom was wrong. But we want to make it right now. I looked at her, and in that moment, I knew. I wasn't angry anymore. But whatever I used to feel, it wasn't there either. Then my dad added one final thing. Even if you're not ready to forgive us, we hope you'll return, have dinner, talk, like we used to. That made me pause. Not because I was moved, but because I realized, in their minds, coming back meant pretending nothing had happened. It meant dinner, small talk, going back to the way things were. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say no outright. I just answered, soft as a breath. I forgive you, but I'm not coming back. Because I'm done being the one who has to stay silent. No one said anything after that. My mom gave a slight nod. My dad avoided my eyes. And Alice just looked at me for a long moment before turning away. I walked them to their car. No hugs, no goodbyes. But I didn't slam the door behind them either. There was only one thing I kept clear in my heart. Forgiveness is something I give for my peace. But going back, there's nothing left to go back to. And before I wrap up this story, there's one more thing I want to share with you. Even though I'm no longer in contact with my parents or Alice, I still regularly video call with Lydia. You're probably wondering how that's even possible, right? I do it through Alice's husband, my brother-in-law, Bryce. Some might be surprised he's caught in the middle, but he's never said anything that hurt me. Ever since everything went down, he stayed in touch, and he's the one who agreed to let me call Lydia every weekend. She always lights up with the biggest smile when she sees me on the screen. She tells me about school, shows off her drawings, and asks if I still have that little mini oven I gave her. That's all. But it's more than enough. And before I end this story, there are two things I want to ask you, the ones who've stayed with me to the end. First, was I wrong for doing everything I could to get the money back after they used my card without permission? And second, this one's a bit lighter. Lydia is about to turn 7. I've been thinking about what to get her for her birthday. The family probably won't invite me, but I plan to ask Lydia and Bryce for ice cream. Just the 3 of us. If you have any fun or thoughtful gift ideas, please drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if this story hit something in you, maybe about boundaries, self-respect, or that feeling of not belonging in your own family, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the following story. At my dad's 65th birthday party, he looked me straight in the face and said in front of our relatives, friends, and colleagues, 3 made me proud. 1 made me check our DNA. The room burst into applause. And me? I knew right then I didn't belong there. At that moment, I stood up, canceled the gift I had planned to give him right before him, and walked away that day. A month later, my mom called. She told me she was proud of me, but by then it was already too late. So here's my story. You tell me, was I wrong to cut ties with them on his birthday? Hello everyone, I'm Jaden. I'm 30 years old, the founder and CEO of MedSoftX, a company that develops software applications for the healthcare industry. Our headquarters is in Austin, Texas, a hub for hundreds of tech companies reshaping how modern medicine operates in the US. I started MedSoftX with just a small amount of capital. The first lines of code were written when I was still living in a tiny rented room without a proper desk. During that time, no one in my family asked how I was doing. No one believed I would make it. My success today is not only the result of sleepless nights and relentless effort. It also came from the people who looked down on me, my family. The ones who gave me life, raised me, and decided I was the one who had lost his way. I was born and raised in a family of 4 siblings, 3 older sisters and me. Ever since I was little, I was the one who got the most attention. Partly because I was the youngest and partly because, at the time, my parents had the financial means to spoil me. Back then, my dad worked as an accountant at a major hospital, and my mom stayed home full-time to take care of us. With an annual income in the hundreds of thousands, they could provide for the 4 of us. My sisters and I never lacked anything. We had more than we needed. And during those early years, I truly believed I had a real family. Today, even though I'm no longer in contact with my 3 sisters, I still have to admit that each of them is incredibly accomplished. The oldest, Grace, is 10 years older than me. She was always top of her class growing up. She studied medicine and is now a doctor at a state hospital. The second, Everly, is 7 years older than me. She's now a branch director at a major bank. Then there's Elena. She's 3 years older and studied law. She's opened her own law office. In the eyes of our extended family and friends, my parents have always been seen as the ideal example. They have 3 successful daughters, all on the right path, all with solid careers. Then there's me, the one no one talks about. A few years ago, I chose a different path that didn't fit into any plan my parents had laid out. And from that moment on, in my father's eyes, I was no longer something to be proud of. My parents began to change in attitude and how they showed love when I turned 18. I remember it clearly. It was a weekend evening, and I had just received my acceptance letter to study information technology. At first, I thought that when I told them about my major, they would at least say something like, "Congratulations," or "We believe in you." I imagined my mom smiling, my dad nodding, even just a small sign of support. But none of that happened. Instead, it was the exact opposite of what I had hoped for. They didn't offer a single kind word. I hadn't even had a chance to sit down when my dad started in. He first said, "The major you chose has no future." He didn't say it out of anger. He said it with apparent contempt. Then he leaned back in his chair and said coldly, "Guys who spend their days glued to a keyboard and a computer screen end up chasing nothing but online fantasies." After hearing that, I couldn't stay silent. I calmly replied, "This is the field I love, and in the future, computers and technology will gradually replace human labor." He immediately brushed it off. Without giving me a chance to explain further, he looked straight at me and gave me two options. The first was to follow his chosen path, meaning I would have to pick one of the three majors my sisters had studied. He would pay for all my tuition and living expenses if I agreed. The second option was to go my own way, and if I chose that, he clarified that he wouldn't give me a single cent. I remember his exact words. He didn't raise his voice or sound angry. He looked at me and said, "I'm not stingy about you, but I won't spend a dime on a major with no future." After that, I couldn't say anything. I just sat there, frozen in the dining room. He stood up like he couldn't stand to look at me for another second. And right before he left, he turned back and said, "You have 3 days to think about what I just said." Then he turned around and walked straight into his room. And then, the next afternoon, around 6 o'clock, all three of my sisters showed up at the house. I figured Mom had called them over. Once they were all there, they didn't wait for me to invite them. All three knocked on my door. I wasn't trying to avoid anyone, so I opened the door and let them in. A few minutes later, they started talking. Grace spoke first. Her voice was gentle as she said, "Jaden, I know you have your reasons, but these days, passion alone isn't enough to make it in IT. I'm just afraid that one day you'll look back and feel like you wasted years on something that led nowhere." Next was Everly. She always carried herself with maturity and spoke like someone who had been through life. "Tech is trending, but it's also more competitive and exhausting than you might think. No one in our family has ever gone down this path, Jaden. Who will understand what you're dealing with if you run into trouble? Have you ever thought about that?" Finally, Elena spoke. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "You're the youngest. You've had more than we ever did. But if you're choosing this major to prove a point, I'm telling you right now that it's not worth it. Going against the grain doesn't always mean you're right." They said much more after that, things I can't fully remember. That whole evening, I didn't say a word back. I just stayed quiet and listened. Not because I had nothing to say, but because my mind had been made up long ago. Since the day I sent in my application to those tech schools. And I didn't need the whole 3 days. That same evening, after all three of my sisters had left one by one, I walked down to the living room. My parents were still there. One was watching the news, the other folding laundry. I stood in front of them and got straight to the point. I said, "I've made my decision. I'll take out student loans and get a part-time job to support myself for the next 4 years." Right after I said it, my dad gave a slight nod. He didn't say a word. He just stood up and walked straight to his room. My mom sat there for a few seconds, then sighed and shook her head before saying, "Jaden, you're so stubborn." In the days that followed, no one told me to leave, but everything in the house felt different. They started avoiding me. If I was downstairs, they stayed upstairs. If I was in the kitchen, they skipped meals. Even dinner was split into 2 portions, one for them and one left aside for me. And it was in those moments that I realized the love they once gave me had shifted. All because I refused to follow the path my dad had laid out. I didn't sit around at home during the 2 months before college started. I decided to work part-time at a small shop near our neighborhood. The work wasn't too hard, but I had to stay on my feet all day, from morning until almost evening. My legs ached, and I felt drained, but I was happy. At least I could take care of myself. More importantly, I didn't have to see the disappointment in my parents' eyes every single day. As for my 3 sisters, Once they saw I was serious about following my passion, they didn't say anything else. Maybe they realized that, at this point, their words wouldn't change a thing. 2 months later, I left my home when the school year officially began. On the day I moved out, I took an old suitcase and a few sets of clothes, just enough to get by. I also had a student loan that barely covered the tuition for my first year. For living expenses, I supported myself by working part-time. Strangely, I didn't feel sad that my parents gave me no support. Instead, I felt a sense of relief. When I walked into the dorm, I saw plenty of other students doing exactly what I was doing. Studying, working, and managing their loans. At that time, I kept my thoughts simple. If others could do it, then so could I. During my 4 years in college, I tried to stay in touch with my family. My mom never called to ask how I was doing or whether I was eating well, but during major holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, she still called to ask me to come home. And because I still had this quiet urge to prove they were wrong, I always showed up on time after every one of her calls. I continued that habit even after I graduated and started working. But 5 Christmases ago, I stopped going back. Because on that day, they rejected me again. And that time, I knew I no longer belonged in that house. 5 years ago, after graduating and working for 3 years, I had saved up a small amount of money, around $100,000, after fully paying off my student loans. I didn't just stick to my full-time job to earn that amount. I also took on freelance projects in the evenings and on weekends. I barely had a single day off that felt complete. But I accepted that reality because I knew I was preparing for something bigger. At that time, small tech companies were beginning to appear everywhere. Some were made up of just a few people in tiny offices. Others worked entirely remotely. After 7 years of studying and working, I considered building a company. It wasn't because I hated my job or felt underpaid. It was because I could see how fast the world was changing. I could feel the pace of technological growth and the massive potential in industries people have always cared about, especially education and healthcare. In the weeks that followed, I spent an entire month developing ideas. I wrote down every note, sketched out every outline, and rewrote and revised constantly. Eventually, I found a clear direction. My company would focus on creating technology platforms to improve service quality in the healthcare industry. But when I looked at my money, I knew it wasn't enough to build a stable foundation. So, I spent another week deep in thought. I searched everywhere for funding options, reaching out to friends and colleagues. Then, one day, after receiving my mom's usual holiday phone call inviting me home for Christmas, an idea suddenly came to mind. What if I raised the remaining $100,000 from my family? I believed that with a detailed business plan, an explicit profit-sharing agreement, and a commitment to repay every cent if I failed, they would be willing to help. But once again, I was wrong. That Christmas, I came home earlier than on any other holiday. When I opened the door, the house was still quiet. No guests had arrived yet. I immediately asked my parents and 3 sisters to come into the living room. I told them I only needed 20 minutes to present something. No one looked particularly interested, but faced with how firm I was, they reluctantly sat down. Once everyone was seated, I got straight to the point. I want to start a company, but right now I'm short $100,000. I will walk you through my plan, and I hope you'll consider helping me with that amount. Then I handed them printed copies of my proposal. I outlined the direction of the business, the target market, potential partners, and projected costs for the first 6 months. Throughout the entire presentation, not a single word was said. But the moment I finished, my dad was the first to speak. His tone was disdainful as he said, "Who do you think you're talking to? Jaden? You're speaking to people who've spent their whole lives in medicine, banking, and law. And you think some app or a couple of pieces of software you wrote will change everything." After him, Grace flipped through a few pages and replied, "You want to use $100,000 from the family for a business model that doesn't even have a single customer yet? Sounds risky, Jaden." Then Everly spoke up with a voice full of judgment. I read through it. I have one question. Why hasn't anyone else invested in you if it's that good? And finally, Elena, usually the quietest of the 3, was the one to close it out. Jaden, honestly, I think you're better suited to freelancing. Running a business? That doesn't sound like you at all. After all that, I knew they weren't going to say yes. I didn't argue or try to defend myself because everything they needed to understand was already in the documents I had given them. But I wasn't ready to give up. I offered one final proposal. If they agreed to lend me the $100,000, I would give them 20% of the company in return and a share of the future profits. I truly believed that this would convince them, But the moment I finished that sentence, all three sisters laughed. It was the kind of laughter that couldn't hide its mockery. Like I had just said something so naive. It was almost pitiful. As for my parents, they didn't say a word. They just shook their heads. And that was enough to tell me I didn't need to try convincing them further. After that laughter, I didn't say anything else. I quietly gathered the papers, slid them back into my bag, stood up, and walked out of the living room. I walked away from the party because I knew there would be nothing worth celebrating if I stayed. That night, when I returned to my small rented apartment on the 3rd floor, I decided I would start my company with what I already had. I immediately pulled out the old business plan and began revising it. I scaled everything down and carefully recalculated each expense to match my $100,000. I rewrote every detail from scratch, from descriptions to implementation steps. It wasn't until nearly sunrise that I finished. 2 months later, my company was officially founded. The office was in an old building. Initially, the team was just me, a young engineer fresh out of school and a part-time college student handling admin tasks. We started small, building software to help private clinics manage appointment schedules and store patient records. In those early months, challenges came at us constantly. Some months after paying rent, we were left with just a few $100s in the bank. I often stayed up until 2 or 3 mornings fixing bugs before deadlines. Sometimes, clients suddenly postponed contracts, and we had to hold emergency meetings to change direction. But no matter what, I never gave up. By the end of our first year, after all expenses were deducted, the company had made a profit of about $20,000. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to show me that I had not taken the wrong path. Entering the 2nd year, I decided to expand as our cash flow began to stabilize. I applied for a $100,000 loan from the bank, using the company itself as collateral. With the new funding, I hired more developers, expanded the office, and upgraded our servers. From there, our revenue began to grow. There was still pressure, but at least we were no longer struggling to stay afloat. Then came the 3rd year and luck started to show up. A small hospital using our software recommended us to a larger healthcare system. Not long after that, we received a partnership offer from an investment fund specializing in healthcare. From the moment we signed that first contract with a primary health system, I knew things had entered a new phase. About 2 weeks later, our financial advisor sent me the latest report. MedSoftX was valued at over $2 million. I still remember how it felt reading that number. A company worth $2 million. But to me, it wasn't just money. It was proof that the son who was once called the shame of the family had built something tangible with his own hands, without a single ounce of help from the people who should have supported him the most. That same year, a few news outlets began mentioning MedSoftX as one of the rising tech companies in the healthcare space. By the 4th year, we had become strategic partners with 3 major hospitals in Texas. The software my team developed was being deployed across multiple facilities for medical records, doctor scheduling, and even remote monitoring for chronic patients. And despite the company's success, I never bragged about anything to anyone. Even when journalists reached out for interviews, I politely declined because I knew that while we had achieved something, no one could say how long that success would last. During those 4 years, as I struggled to build everything step by step, not a single call came from my family. Maybe after the day I stood up and walked out of the living room with that business plan in my hands, I had stopped being part of the family in their eyes. Maybe, to them, I had chosen the wrong path and deserved whatever consequences came with it, so no one bothered to check how I was doing. I used to think the relationship between me and them would always be like 2 parallel lines, never crossing. But then, 6 months ago, my mom called after more than 4 years of complete silence. The call lasted less than a minute. She didn't ask how I was living or how work was going. She said, "Your father's 65th birthday. We're hosting it at home. Come if you can." The invitation sounded simple enough. But after I hung up, I sat there silently for several minutes. There was a quiet warmth spreading through me. It was just a single invitation, but at the very least, it meant they hadn't completely forgotten me. And honestly, after all those years, that alone was enough to lift a bit of the weight off my chest. And once again, I made a mistake. After that invitation, I wanted to prove I had made it to them. Right then, I decided I would give my father 10% ownership in a hospital with which I had just signed a contract a few months earlier. About 9 months ago, during a Wednesday afternoon meeting, I received an email from a private hospital on the outskirts of Austin. They expressed interest in using the full suite of the new management software MedSoftX had been developing. I recognized the name of the hospital immediately. It was where my father had worked as an accountant for nearly 20 years before retiring. That night, I sat alone in the office, thinking for a long time. And when the day came to finalize the contract, I made a last-minute change to the proposal. Instead of charging the usual service fee, I submitted a different offer. That day, I told the hospital director, I want to convert the entire service fee into equity in the hospital. After I said that, the director looked at me momentarily. Then he nodded and replied, I know who you are, and I know if we let you have a stake in this hospital, we'll never have to worry about technology again. 3 weeks later, I officially became a strategic shareholder, holding 10% ownership in the hospital. On my father's birthday, I arrived early. It was just after 10 in the morning. When I arrived, the front yard had already been decorated, neat but straightforward. I brought a few bottles of wine and a black envelope with the notarized documents for the equity transfer. Everything was prepared carefully, but I did not intend to give it to him immediately. I wanted to wait and see how they treated me. I needed to know if this was truly an invitation from the heart or just the last ounce of social obligation they still remembered to fulfill. Around 11, the party officially began. After the cake was cut, guests started to eat, and the atmosphere became lively. I caught a few familiar glances and heard a few polite greetings. People said things like, "So how have you been?" Or "Heard you're doing something in tech." Then they shifted to the following table before I had time to respond. I didn't blame them. They had no reason to care about me, especially when my family hadn't done so in years. About 30 minutes in, my father stood up, raised his glass, and began to speak. His voice rang above the noise, loud enough to draw everyone's attention. I want to thank all my relatives, friends, and former colleagues for being here today, he said, his eyes moving around the room filled with familiar faces. Then his tone changed. I could tell he was moving into the part one had already predicted. I'm proud that all 3 of my daughters have become successful, respectable women. Grace is now the chief doctor of a state hospital. Everly is a bank branch director. Elena runs her own law office. I couldn't ask for more. After the round of praise, people started clapping. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, and someone laughed out loud. I stayed quiet, still seated in a corner by the window, my wine untouched. I thought maybe that was it. With a few words of pride and a few laughs, then it would all pass. But it didn't. After a short pause, my father continued. This time, he looked in my direction and said, 3 made me proud. 1 made me check our DNA. The room fell silent for a second. Then came the laughter. Some people clapped again. Others glanced at me like they were watching a joke that had gone too far. But no one said anything. I didn't laugh. I just looked straight at him. And in that moment, I knew they hadn't called me home to reconnect. They didn't care how I was doing. They had called me back to remind me that, in their eyes, I was still the outsider, still the shadow that didn't fit their picture-perfect family. After those words, I decided I wouldn't stay silent any longer. There was no reason to keep lowering my head in a place called family that had treated me like a stranger. Right then, I stood up. Every eye turned toward me. A few relatives exchanged glances, waiting to see what I would do. My father sat back down, arms crossed, as if bracing for another pathetic act from the son he had always seen as a failure. I spoke, my voice low and steady. I know not everyone here wanted to see me today. Maybe Mom only invited me so no one in the family would talk behind her back. But since I'm here, I'll speak. I paused for a beat, then looked directly at my father. You asked if I was switched at birth. So let me confirm, I'm not what you expected. I didn't go into medicine like Grace, didn't work in banking like Everly, and didn't study law like Elena. But in the 8 years since I walked out of this house, not a single person in this family has asked how I've been, whether I'm doing okay. Then I opened my leather briefcase and took out a folder. Inside were the notarized documents for the hospital shares I had once planned to give him as a birthday gift. I held it up and looked around the room. My voice rang out again. A few months ago, I became the 3rd largest shareholder in the hospital where Dad used to work as an accountant. I had planned to give my parents 10% of those shares today, with a clause guaranteeing lifetime dividends. But thanks to what Dad just said, I think it's clear they won't be needing this anymore. The room went quiet the moment the folder appeared. Some relatives looked at each other. Some leaned in to get a better view of the document on the table. My father picked it up, his eyes scanning the page, his brow twitching slightly. A moment later, he looked up. His gaze wasn't as confident as before. His voice was lower, but he tried to stay composed. So, what are you trying to prove? I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him long enough that he had no choice but to meet my eyes. Then I spoke, calm and clear, every word deliberate. I'm not trying to prove anything. I just wanted you to know that I still remember you. But after today, after everything you've said, I will cancel this transfer. First thing tomorrow. I slowly and carefully put the documents back in my bag as if I had never intended to give them away. No threats, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet finality of someone who had stopped hoping. And before I walked out of that house, I turned back and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. You don't need to check the DNA, Dad. After today, consider that you no longer have a son. Then I walked away. A few relatives lowered their heads. Some watched me go, unsure what to say. As for my parents and my 3 sisters, they just sat there, frozen, as if they still hadn't fully grasped what had just happened. My mother called me 3 days after the party I quietly walked out of. At the time, I had just finished an internal meeting and was sitting alone in my office, staring at the new strategic planning board for the next quarter. The phone rang 3 times before I picked up. Her voice on the other end sounded hoarse, slower than usual. After a moment of hesitation, she spoke, her tone like someone trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. Jaden, I'm sorry for everything. What your father said that day, it wasn't right. He was just upset. But he still cares about you. I didn't respond. I stayed silent. Not because I was angry, but because some words, if they only come out after someone's run out of options, no longer have the power to reach you. After that, she asked a few more questions, told me to take care of myself, and then hung up. While packing up documents in the office and getting ready to move to our new headquarters that night, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my oldest sister. I read the line, "We were wrong. You're the only one who stood alone without anyone holding you up." I didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. About a month after leaving my father's birthday party, I was invited to speak at a conference on startups and healthcare technology. It was the first time I stood before an audience as the founder of MedSoftX. At first, I hesitated. I had always been more comfortable staying behind everything, letting the product speak for itself. But for some reason, the night before the conference, I felt a sense of calm. As if, after all those years, it was finally time for me to speak. Not to take credit, but to show that my silence had never come from weakness. That day, I didn't wear a suit. I didn't prepare any slides. I brought only a name badge. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the stage, looked directly toward the front row, where the students listened intently, and began to tell my story. I spoke about building a company with just $100,000, about the sleepless nights in a small rented apartment, about the first time I hired someone without knowing I could pay them if things collapsed, and about the moment I stood up and walked out of a family party, carrying nothing but my pride. 2 days later, the story appeared on the front page of a major newspaper. The photo showed me in our company's conference room, with the programming team working behind me. The camera angle was from the side, enough to capture the look on my face as I stared at the screen, calm, focused, and with something distant in my expression. I didn't send the article to anyone in my family because I didn't feel the need to. But that evening, while I was eating dinner alone, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. Just one line, "We're proud of you." I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't smile. I just felt something quietly slipping out of my chest. Not because I was moved, but because I knew they only wrote those words once the world recognized me. I didn't reply. I placed the phone back on the table, finished my meal, and let that message drift down the screen with the rest of the conversations I would never return to. And now, after everything, I choose to walk this path alone. Not because I no longer have a family, but because I've learned that some roads must be walked alone, especially when no one believed you could take the first step. Sometimes, during late nights in the office, I remember that moment years ago when my father said, "Guys who spend all day glued to a keyboard never amount to anything." I'm no longer angry with him. Honestly, I'm even grateful. Grateful to him and all 3 of my sisters, because it was their rejection, their doubt, and even their contempt that pushed me farther than I ever thought I could go. If they had agreed to loan me the money back then, maybe I wouldn't have pushed myself so hard. If they had praised me, perhaps I would have settled too soon. And if they had never turned their backs on me, maybe I would never have learned how to stand alone. I'm not telling this story to blame anyone. I'm telling it to anyone who's ever been told they'll never amount to anything. Suppose someone says that to you, smile. Then, keep going, no need to argue. There is no need to prove anything right away, because sometimes, silence is the beginning of a voice more powerful than any defense. And the lesson I've learned from my own story is this. No one can take your worth from you unless you hand it to them. And before I end today's story, I want to ask you, the one still listening until the very last moments, if you were in my place, standing in a room full of relatives, and heard your father say he wasn't sure you were his child, what would you have done? Would you have walked away in silence, like I once did? Would you still choose to love, even when that love is not returned? Or would you keep moving forward and never look back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear from you because maybe, somewhere in my story, there is a part of your story too. And if what I shared today meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe. We still have many stories to share. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.